hbomberguy released a video about plagiarism on YouTube early December 2023.
You can spend ages on a unique video with an original idea, and a way more popular guy can rip it off, along with its thumbnail, get a bajillion views and rake in the cash. On YouTube, if you have an original idea, if it's good, it won't be yours for long.
He said,
Philip's review was made for his personal channel before he was even hired at IGN, meaning he'd been doing this for a while. Scullion himself would later post a video comparing his review with Philip's, showing off the many similarities, and I'll link that in the description.
But that's it. That's the only source in an almost 4-hour-long video that he links in the description. He links his second channel video in it, which only links back to the main channel one, and other creators' content, but no source doc. However, I think it was a deliberate decision. He has used source docs in the past, and said,
as long as you hide a link in a document no one will read, or mention once you used it as a source, it magically becomes not plagiarism anymore.
Something mirrored by many other creators, for example.
All scientific papers should probably be titled, because then people might actually read them instead of watching YouTubers. I'm linking all of these in a Google Doc in the description, but you won't bloody read them, will you? Yeah. I've got to read them for you.
Which makes me think he hasn't done or included a source doc because he doesn't think people will read it. He does say that,
I have a little rule for quoting that other creators seem to use as well. If someone saw a clip of your video out of context, would it be possible for them to tell you're quoting someone and where it's from?
And I'm not saying a source doc is needed, but he doesn't expand, and I know it's a lot of effort, but I think there are some things that should be sourced. One person responding to the hbomberguy plagiarism video said,
because, like, if I'm talking about the media response to something, yeah, I'll take a screenshot of a headline and you'll see where it came from. Cool. I still should be linking to that in the description so that you know I didn't Photoshop it. Because personally, I'm honestly too lazy to even try and do that, but it would be a valid concern.
And hbomberguy even points out an example in his video.
He's still hiding what happened, in a pretty sneaky way this time. You see, this graphic of the copy strike has been edited. The notice on the video actually looks like this. It shows who made the copyright claim, but obviously he doesn't want people looking up the company behind it, because then people will find out why the video is unavailable. So now he's editing screenshots to try to hide what he did.
Past tweets or X posts can be hard to find, but very easy to screenshot and make up. Yes, a link may lead to a does not exist anymore page, but then at least we know it was deleted or changed in some way, or not linked properly in the first place. Maybe a little bit nitpicky, but when audio from a video is matched with words for contrast, I don't see a source.
The movie opens with a shadowy figure with multiple hand attachments who calls in the boys, 4 men from a government agency trying to deal with an alien invasion in a small New Zealand town. Peter Jackson plays dual roles of Derek and Robert, who interact through the use of creative camera work and editing.
Yes, I found the article and the video from previous explanations, but he doesn't quite follow his own rule.
If someone saw a clip of your video out of context, would it be possible for them to tell you're quoting someone and where it's from?
I like the graph from this part of the video, but I don't know where it comes from.
On October 10th, the apology video disappeared, along with 901,000 views worth of other videos from Philip's channel. For a small YouTuber, this means a lot of videos getting privated or deleted all at once.
I would guess Social Blade, because I've seen other people use the tool before, but I don't know, and if I wasn't familiar with Social Blade, how would I find out? With this snippet here.
It also plagiarized one of his co-workers at IGN. Words from Seth Macy's video review of the game made it in too. Here's some clips from Macy's video.
Both its battle system and aesthetics pay loving tribute to the Super NES era. While this isn't merely a modern retread of past classics, but a phenomenal homage with genuinely fresh ideas and a fantastically charming wrapper of old school meets new.
I found the article easily enough from the screen recording, but I still can't seem to find the video. Here, he plays a video from Apology number 3.
The explanation lies in a little thing he said in Apology number 3. I consider it the most meaningful thing Philip has ever said. It's not true, but it's meaningful.
So I took from sources who I trusted and respected and I agreed with, and I tried to change them in a way that I would say it.
But how do I know that was apology number 3 or even an apology video without a screen source or a source doc of some kind. You could go back a few minutes, but again, referring to that, if it takes out a clip, it doesn't quite work, and you can find the videos on YouTube at the moment because they appear in search. But what if they didn't? Now, there are screen sources in the video.
They say, this movie's great, and then I think, oh, well, this movie sucks. So if I'm doing the review, obviously, I have to see the movie and write the script. It's all me.
This is probably why he made a statement about this. Most people watching would have assumed James wrote the words he was saying.
But titles of things can get changed and are changed, making articles and YouTube videos difficult to find sometimes. Especially when YouTube channels have hundreds of videos and they change the title, it's very difficult to sift through them all. And when the on-screen source is taken away and a video comes up, I don't know if it's a different part of the same video or a different video. He makes me make an assumption, which I will expand on later. Yes, I am one of those weird people that read the source docs and go and try and find the original sources if I can. I'm not saying hbomberguy made anything up or faked any of the research. Just to be clear, I'm not saying hbomberguy faked the video, but he could have. He says towards the end of the video.
Simply being able to talk about plagiarism and bring attention to it and let people decide if something is and who they want to support going forward, that's good enough for now. But don't take my word for it on this. I'm certainly not. Someone smarter than me might come up with a better idea, so let's keep our eyes peeled for that.
I'm not saying that I'm smarter than him, but I have an idea which I'll share at the end of the video. And I think he has done all we can really do in past videos. I assume the comment about people not reading the source doc is why he chose not to add one in this video. Someone could, even with a source doc and on-screen sources and proof of all the research, call the video fake, but I don't think that claim would hold up as well. So I personally would have liked to see a source doc, and for me, I would have liked to have seen him sort of leading by example, especially in a critique as big and as popular as this one. I think good practice is to show sources on screen and a link to sources somewhere, and then for complex topic discussions, explain where the thinking comes from in some way. However, practically sourcing on YouTube is a bit all over the place at the moment.
Academia is pretty picky about you getting all of the formatting boxes correct. Over here in YouTube, in the edutainment section, formatting doesn't really matter as long as you have all of the information.
We don't need academic formats. Certainly not the amount of academic formats available.
Okay, we need to talk about how to cite a source for a second. If you watch any non-Illuminati video essay, you'll see these pretentious little commies put some text in the corner telling you where their quote comes from. This is so you know what they're quoting, so you can check it or go find it and learn more if you want, and to give proper credit to the people whose ideas or knowledge they're borrowing. If you're using someone else's words in a video you intend to make money off, it's very important to give proper credit and attribution. Listing where the quote is from is important, not just so it's easy for people to find and verify it, but it's useful context which helps people interpret what they're seeing.
Some creators show URLs on screen, but then there is documentation.
Documentation is putting that attribution where it needs to go, so others reading your work understand the idea's originator. Totally documenting your reference means you'll have the full lookup info on the works cited page in addition to the in-text citation next to the idea you're incorporating. And this is something I've seen trip up students. You need to have the in-text citation even if you aren't directly quoting that work. Ideally, you're paraphrasing it, but that original idea still belongs to that other author. Give them the props they deserve.
So apart from URLs on screen being somewhat inconvenient, links can break, which is where I think the author and titles of documentation can help that. Some other arguments for putting sources on screen.
One thing I think we should do as a community is hard code or burn in or embed or however you want to call it, the citations into the video, even if it's in an abbreviated format. This buys us a couple things. First, it allows people on all devices to at least partially access the references. Second, the citation being a part of the video makes it more difficult for the less scrupulous YouTubers to pull shenanigans with their references when they're caught. It's a lot harder to edit an uploaded video than it is to tinker around with the description box or fiddle with pastebin or however else references can be shared. And the final advantage is in viewing this as the edutainment corner of YouTube is we're modeling good source attribution.
Some creators use bibliographies, author and title in the description of videos. much easier to find the sources, but I don't know where the source is referenced in the video unless it's said. And the description is capped to 5,000 characters, so some people remove or reduce the list because they're capped with characters. You could use the pinned comment for the bibliography because that's capped at 10,000 characters, but still there's no on-screen reference points to where the source is actually applicable. Others have used linked pages to get around the character or word limit, but there's still no on-screen reference to what source goes where. So to me, the logical conclusion would be to combine those two things together. On-screen reference which relates to a bibliography linked somewhere that has the author, title, and a URL link. Others go even further by adding in the script and further reading around the sources, so you've got the source doc, you've got the bibliography, and additional reading for those that are curious enough to continue researching. But that is a little bit much for some people, but it could be seen as a gold standard. We could use the YouTube card system because that's got on-screen sources and bibliography sort of information, but we're limited to 5. However, quality of sources also shouldn't be forgotten. This creator was sharing their source dive.
For example, in the studies that the behavioural arts linked under this video, one of them is not from a peer-reviewed journal and also from 1969. Any scientific study from over 50 years ago should immediately ring alarm bells because methodology has gone through vast improvements since then, and there's probably another better study that's been carried out since that completely proves it wrong. And guess what? There is a better study that's been carried out since that completely proves it wrong.
Which goes on for a while, because academics need to write to keep their job, which I've explained before, but one source can mean much more than another source. Something else.
Your source for anything you're going to repeat yourself on a podcast or a YouTube video should probably not be other creators unless they are talking about their own direct experience or they conducted their own interviews or whatnot. If they are the primary source, okay. If they're not, probably best to check what their primary source was before you repeat it.
Emphasizing the importance of finding original sources. However, adding sources isn't everything.
Now, maybe this technically isn't plagiarism. Maybe you give them a pass because having a link somewhere in a description makes it okay to have done this. But I think we can all agree that even if it isn't plagiarism, it is, at the very least, shit.
So can you do feel-good plagiarism?
Realizing how heavily regurgitated someone's work is changes how it feels to watch. Even if you like something about it, now in the back of your mind you're wondering if it's them you like and not the person they got it from. Plagiarism stains a person's work and makes it tough to appreciate even the original parts, because you'll never really know for sure again if they're original.
Which begs the question, what is original content?
In one of my favourite books, Steal Like an Artist, there's a quote from William Ralph Ing, which says, "What is originality? Undetected plagiarism." I don't like that idea.
A different creator saying,
"Creativity is messy, and originality is a liberal myth. It's been said that there is nothing new under the sun. By me, just now. And maybe that's true. Maybe there is nothing original. Maybe every creative decision anyone ever makes is just all the stuff they've consumed, experiences they've had, and feelings they've felt being blended together and served up as a dish that seems fresh, but is in fact entirely made up of regurgitated ingredients."
And after ranking different stages of plagiarism, Tom goes on to say,
"Now, while I've had a lot of fun trying to define these terms, I do want to say that I don't think it would be entirely helpful to look at creativity through this lens, especially not originality. I believe it would take a great deal of arrogance, or at least blissful ignorance, to ever believe that you could be truly original. I think at the end of the day, we're all just building off each other's work and ideas, creatively leapfrogging off one another for the betterment of mankind? No, that's probably too much. The betterment of mindlessly entertaining and distracting each other. Yeah, let's go with that."
So how does sourcing help if you can't be truly original and it doesn't stop plagiarism?
This should be, the whole point of this is transparency, right? The whole point of this is to tell people, here's where I got this idea, here's where you can find it, go ahead and grab it. And the best way to do that is to be as descriptive as possible.
And this is where integrity, morals, and ethics of the individual comes into that feel-good plagiarism. hbomberguy did a video way back in 2017 about plagiarism on YouTube.
along with dismissing a fairly decent and affordable USB microphone for newer or young people who don't need professional quality. His voice is in this annoyingly performative tone. His audio is noticeably overproduced, and every sentence ends with him smugly droning the final word, and it's super grating to listen to. But worse than any of that, almost all the video's content, style, arguments, and research is stolen.
Yes, showing plagiarism has been on the internet for a long time, but also suggesting it is about the presentation of the information. One person saying,
plagiarism at its core is just taking somebody's work and words and presenting it as your own. Yes, even if you change some of the order of the wording or some of the specific individual words.
And another going on to say,
accusations of plagiarism are actually about people who have paraphrased poorly or who have taken ideas from another author and rephrased them without really adding anything substantial.
The adding substantial bits will come up later on, but this also emphasizes the reducing text or paraphrasing.
If you're paraphrasing, that means you've taken a 2-paragraph section from a book and you're restating what they said in your own words, maybe in a much shorter amount of space. So the reason why you might paraphrase is you're going to take a whole chapter of a book and you're going to boil it down to a paragraph in your text and you sort of summarize it. That's a form of paraphrasing, and it must be cited. You need to give a citation about where those ideas came from. They're still not your ideas. You've done some work, the work of taking that and compressing it down and compiling it into something shorter and briefer and punchier or whatever. That's work, and no one's going to take that from you. But you still need to paraphrase it because the ideas are not your own.
Maybe you've done lots of research and you've come up with an original thought. Well,
citations should be used anytime you are referencing ideas that you got from somewhere else, and not even that you're necessarily describing those ideas directly. But if you're even truly in a part of your writing where you are describing a new idea that's your own, but that idea is built upon information you've gotten from other authors, normally those authors should be cited there as well.
And just to be clear, so-called experts don't always have or show good sourcing practices. In a video debunking body language experts, the creator says,
and he cites studies throughout to supposedly prove what he's saying, but as I've explained, pointing to a single study in this area of science doesn't prove anything. Your best bet is looking at the meta-analyses, but even then they sometimes disagree with each other, and they're all based on lab tests which are wildly different from the scenarios Navarro describes in this book.
Which is where digital literacy, a skill the OECD framework is trying to encourage in educational systems, is important. Although hbomberguy's video is about plagiarism, it is also about misinformation. Bear with me on this.
Here's Philip's version.
However, when you get up close and get a good look at some of the character models, it's pretty clear that they do have a good amount of less detail than the Xbox One and PS4 versions of the game do.
It's pretty clear that they do have a good amount of less detail. No one would ever write that sentence on purpose. You only create that by trying to change something you stole. There's a great example here of the deeper problems that plagiarism can cause. Philip's review contains false information.
I agree. Rewording can lead to misleading or misinformation, but he goes on to say,
for example here when he talks about the game's Women's League feature.
FIFA 18 comes with the standard tournament and kickoff modes, as well as the Women's League, which was officially introduced in FIFA 16.
There are no women's leagues in FIFA 18. There's women's football, but leagues are specific real-life organizations that do not exist in the game.
Which I don't think is accurate. FIFA 16 and FIFA 18 both have the Women's Super League in. Unless I'm misunderstanding something, hbomberguy saying that Philip was sharing misinformation is in itself misinformation. Otherwise it would be like saying FIFA doesn't have any men's leagues in either because leagues don't exist in the game, but you've got the Premier League, the Championships League, and League 1, 2, 3, etc. I haven't seen anyone talk about this, maybe because...
Again, a lot of it comes down to, this is a harsher word than I mean it, but laziness. And I don't mean that audiences are lazy and they should have checked everything he said. No. If you wanted to do that, you would literally be doing your own research and probably be making better video essays than people like James Somerton do. But if you're an audience, you're here to get somebody else's summation and conclusions. And even if you sometimes question, I'm not sure about that, we tend to still accept that somebody did the base level work.
And there is definitely at least base level research done in the video. But as I've been reminded many times in the comment section of my video that references Johnny Harris, any slip can be seen as unprofessional, reducing the feel of the video, spelling, grammar, pronunciation, words, or number slips, similar to this case. And hbomberguy picks out slipped facts.
Internet Historian's video has mistakes. He gets the weight of the rock pinning Collins's leg down wrong. He says it's 33 pounds, while the article lists 27. Every credible source I can find has it listed as around 27 pounds, give or take, and the Wikipedia page lists 26. The rock weighs about 26.5 pounds. How do I know this? We still have it. We've weighed it. It's 26.5 pounds. How did he make this mistake when all his sources, including the one he was plagiarizing, say otherwise?
But I think most of us would argue it's the combination of the very similar scripting and the slipped facts that makes it feel less good. Towards the end of his video, he discusses misinformation next to plagiarized content.
YouTubers who act like serious documentarians gain a shroud of professionalism which then masks the deeply unprofessional things they do. We just saw that with James. I think he's partially got away with what he's doing for so long because he acts so professional about it, so people assume there's no way he could just be stealing shit, so they don't check. And on top of that, a lot of James's videos contain obvious mistakes and made-up facts, which we haven't even had the time to get into in this video. But because they're often presented next to well-researched stuff he stole, no one questions it. I've seen James repeat a lie in his videos, and then other people claim it's true and link his video as the proof. He has helped to solidify misinformation by seeming like he's doing his diligence.
Again, alluding to the feel of the video. It feels good, so the audience assumes it is. When loads of quotes are used, it could also feel good.
Seriously, huge chunks of the video are just reading entire screenfuls of text from the BBC, various papers, Slate, The Telegraph, and Brian Deere. Yeah, she actually quotes Brian Deere in this one. Wow! But this makes the videos boring. She's just reading pages of quotes at you. So to break up the screens of text and make it feel more original, sometimes she doesn't tell you she's reading someone else's words.
But as mentioned earlier, using quotes isn't plagiarism. It is, often when people use them,
paraphrased poorly, or who have taken ideas from another author and rephrased them without really adding anything substantial.
hbomberguy going on to talk about lazy creators.
When I think a video is being lazy, I do a little test. I check what sources the video used, thankfully Blair provided a list, and I compare it with the sources you would get if you went to the Wikipedia page for the topic. All of the quotes in that 5-minute sequence I mentioned, including the Telegraph article she plagiarized, are just linked on Wakefield's Wikipedia page.
So the lack of adding anything substantial and or the taking credit for other people's research, which makes the video feel less good, but only if you know they haven't credited some other researcher, and those characteristics are often found in the content mill channels.
The phrase content mill refers to organizations which produce huge amounts of material very quickly, designed to get attention, with no interest in quality. If you've ever seen an article in a search with a compelling title but which says nothing for several hundred words, and only tells you the thing you wanted at the end, while showing you 7 million ads, you've had the content mill experience, my friend.
This happens in academia in a similar way.
Oh, there's several paper mills. Yeah, so a paper mill, a scientific paper mill, there are companies that make falsified papers. When I found a paper mill that looked fairly realistic, but it was a paper about prostate cancer, and half of the patients were female, were women, and you're like, that's unexpected.
Paper mills often sharing false or misleading information for the academics to keep their jobs. Content mills often sharing false or misleading information for money. And on YouTube, sometimes this isn't just one channel.
Now, these channels, it's not just one channel. That one channel has a channel in 16 different languages.
Yeah. And
that one channel has 4 other channels that also have channels in 16 other languages. And then all of a sudden you have other groups that just have 40, 45 channels.
Before going a little bit further into money, I do want to bring up this clip from the hbomberguy video.
If you're honest about it, there's not even anything wrong with adapting a book or telling people what you found on Wikipedia. Different people like getting information in different ways. Wikipedia lets people record and upload readings of pages so you can learn about Bhutanese passports through audio, and they do it for a reason.
Bhutanese passport!
Some people might even prefer a video version. It would practically be an accessibility feature. Making video adaptations of interesting books or mental floss articles is an idea with potential. It's a way of spreading writing and ideas to a new audience, and all you have to do is be honest about it. That also forces you to be accountable. You'd have to ask permission and get the approval of the people who wrote what you're adapting, which clears up any potential criticisms or infringement on the existing work.
Emphasizing that a video version of an article or a book or another source is good and can be useful, if you have permission and credit the research, of course. Because when you don't source the people that put the work in, that doesn't feel good. Again, if you find out they weren't crediting people. hbomberguy shares an experience at the end of the video some people may have missed that I think researchers and video creators will relate to.
So I wasted a lot of time trying to get a shot that I ended up not getting. And that's why videos like this take this long. Imagine something like that happening once a week. This is why people steal things. Doing your own research is life-ruining. Tune in next time when I make a donut. That's not a joke, that happens in the next video. Bye!
As alluded to earlier, many of the examples in the hbomberguy video also share misinformation, which this creator points out.
But if hbom doesn't cover this stuff, I want the truth to be told. And if you watch this video all the way through, I hope it's clear why I felt like I had to make this. So, without further ado, I give you the many bullshit claims of James Somerden.
And this is where the drama and reaction content kinda go wild a bit. Caveat here.
Drama content creation, as cringe as it is, as much as we all hate each other, has a part in the ecosystem that is the internet. And it is YouTube and Twitch. As much as people pretend to hate drama content, it holds itself in the overall ecosystem of YouTube. If there was no people that were willing to shit talk all the other people when they fuck up, things wouldn't get done. Lessons would be never taught. Repeat situations would continue to repeat over and over and over and over and over again.
Spelling and grammar police are all over the internet, but...
Funny sound bit or joke someone else made? Use it! Someone else's funny video? Put yourself in front of it. A popular bit or trend? Steal it 1 for 1. Freeboot entire videos and react to freebooted videos. Yoink an entire audio clip you didn't make, add a text-to-speech voice and some fucking GTA 5 gameplay or Subway Surfers, and rot your viewer's brain until they become a pile of sludge.
Stop right there, Circle. We're the argument police.
Argument police.
And your argument is stupid. Are you honestly saying that this sort of behavior hasn't always been apparent in the content space?
Hey, officers. Take the wife somewhere nice, okay, Ted? We've all had our differences, right? But we can all fucking agree that this is bullshit, right?
All online platforms have issues with content reuse, but some people argue it is okay. But when it's being used on TikTok for marketing profits...
I make videos on TikTok, and I know that there are plenty of legitimate companies that do advertise on TikTok. But there is also a freebooting and content stealing problem across TikTok that the platform generally just seems to let slide, which really crosses a line when companies steal people's videos and use them to advertise their products in sponsored posts. Whether it be scam companies who steal Rochelle Zhang's content to advertise their knockoff products, or even legitimate brands like Steve Madden who steal Markiplier's likeness to endorse their boots in a sponsored ad.
Or on YouTube for views. Again, money.
As I found out, behind the wall of misleading thumbnails and titles is a nearly bottomless pit of content theft and criminality.
We'd have single viral videos being stolen upwards of 100,000 times by 100,000 different channels.
I don't think this is the feel-good plagiarism or feel-good content reuse that we would want to see. And content reuse is everywhere.
How big is this issue?
We started off with weather channels doing nothing but weather, and they were just spamming the same weather videos over and over and over again with these outrageous headlines and outrageous thumbnails. Same thing you're seeing with the science spam, we're seeing on the weather spam.
Yeah.
This is true across aviation, it's true across history, it's every aspect of every genre on YouTube is now being spammed like this.
But those doing reaction content seem to see it as acceptable. Reaction content often falling into the content mill category.
So you can see how content mill shit dovetails very nicely with ripping people off, if not outright plagiarism. And right in the middle of this ecosystem are reaction videos, where people just upload themselves reacting to other people's videos. The money almost makes itself! Reaction videos are a key piece of the Illuminati puzzle here, because that was Blair's previous content mill.
And many of the creators speaking up about this have raised very similar points. This is just one example.
But now it's 2023, and reaction content couldn't be more popular or more divisive if it tried. You'll now find hundreds of thousands of clips of every creator live streaming YouTube and watching other people's content. Often not even speaking, sometimes eating food, and the hilarious worst one is when they get up and leave entirely, leaving the video to play on their channel with zero added input. XQC has been called out for this numerous times, and this started a wave of people in general calling out this form of content. On the other side, you have those that argue that this is a good thing and it bolsters and inflates smaller creators when they've been seen by such a massive audience. But this has been proven to be false most of the time.
But there are so-called creator no-nos that rely on morals and ethics of the individuals, likely also falling back to the integrity of the creator. This clip highlights one situation.
I'm instead having to talk about one of the biggest no-nos I've ever seen on the YouTube platform. And to call it huge drama would be an underservice. It'd be a lie. It's more accurate to say a huge crime has been committed by one of YouTube's biggest creators. And that crime is doxing, which it's a real crime in the state of California. Look, cyber harassment statute. And it was committed by Sniper Wolf. Again, I think the top 100 maybe most subscribed to YouTuber on the platform. She doxed Jack Films, an OG YouTuber,
emphasizing how odd this drama and reaction content can go. And because of the way content is pushed to people, it could encourage people to do certain things and behave in certain ways, or encourage certain types of thinking, which could move from internet interaction to in-person interaction. I'm thinking about all of the different social learning theories here. This example clip talks about TikTok, but could be applied to most online platforms.
Not only that, but TikTok has been proven to, and sometimes in a few minutes, be able to pinpoint a person's interests, including depression, and overfeed a user with only those videos and relevant hashtags.
It is just the way online content works, and you might think this creates echo chambers and filter bubbles where you don't see opposing opinions, which is entirely possible, but...
You've probably heard about online filter bubbles. Algorithms give you exactly what you want, or what they think you want. You only see information that shows you opinions that agree with yours, while dissenting opinions or information are filtered out. Since you only see content close to your worldview, more extreme and toxic opinions suddenly seem less extreme. You're trapped in a radicalizing filter bubble, and your view of the world becomes narrower and more extreme. But is that true? Extreme filter bubbles seem to be rather rare. Studies that investigated what people actually look at online or are shown by search engines found little evidence that you're ideologically isolated. It's the exact opposite. Online, you are constantly confronted with opinions and worldviews that are not your own. It turns out that the place where you are the most ideologically isolated is your real life, in the real world, with real people.
And when looking into one of the sources of that video, one of them said, psychological mechanisms allow individuals to disregard messages from individuals who they deem different. So you likely see opposing opinions, you just choose, for whatever reason, not to engage with or watch the content at a level that is reading proficient. As said in the recent PISA 2022 report, reading in the 21st century involves not only the printed page but electronic formats, i.e. digital reading. It requires triangulating different sources, navigating through ambiguity, distinguishing between fact and opinion, and constructing knowledge. Which is a point I will expand on later on, but some of these content creators using plagiarized work are being sued by those that have had enough.
A major Indian news outlet, News Nation, has been hit with 40 to 50 copyright strikes, and as a result, they have deleted 27,000 videos. hoping to escape any penalties.
People somewhat exploiting content reuse. However, the reaction content creators argue they are adding to the original, falling under fair use.
See, the reason I keep playing these clips is because of a little thing called fair use, the extremely important legal doctrine that allows creators to upload content that isn't theirs. And in order for content to fall under fair use, it must be transformative and add new meaning to the material.
But fair use is up for interpretation, hence the various issues with content reuse. YouTube takes a stand on copyright, quite heavily in some cases, but there are still lots of issues with it, and it misses quite a lot of content, mainly because it can be worked around.
One positive change YouTube has made over the past few years is to give creators the ability to search for copyright matches to their own content, and even use it for takedowns. However, this tool does have its limits. It only works with exact or near exact content matches, to such a point where it's mostly only useful in blatant content theft cases.
However, sourcing and citation isn't looked at by YouTube at all. YouTube looks for copyright, as one creator discussed.
Essentially, copyright infringement is the unauthorized use of another person's creative work. Copyright is the protection that law extends to the creators of literary and artistic work, recognizing that they have specific rights to their work that in many ways boil down to profit. Regardless of your intent, simply using someone else's work without their permission can amount to copyright infringement, even if you give full credit to them and don't claim their work as your own. By contrast, plagiarism is the act of trying to pass off someone's work as your own. It includes blatant copying, yes, but it also encompasses trying to make someone's ideas look like your own original output by simply rephrasing their words.
So it's left up to the creators and the audience to point out potential plagiarized content. One of the many reasons the hbomberguy video is so good and so important. It points out areas for concern that's worth looking into more. The Faultline channel said,
but both channels were clearly inspired by the events that are happening on the West to tell this story. Inspiration is not plagiarism, and neither is quoting something word for word with proper permissions and citings.
But then you could make the argument that if the reaction channels put a source doc in the description, then it's okay, which is what hbomberguy said about the Illuminati case.
The video has a link in the description to a list of sources, where stuff she quoted or showed in the video gets linked. This is normal, lots of people do this, although usually they cite them when they use them in the actual video, but still. It's an unlabeled collection of links that's difficult to sort through, but if you keep digging, eventually you find a link to Brian Deer's YouTube upload of the documentary. So now if anyone criticizes the fact she ripped it off, she can say, no, I was using a source, I cited it, check, it's in my list somewhere. And she uses this flimsy excuse to basically steal anything she wants. Blair frequently plagiarizes people, never mentions they exist in the video or cites them anywhere, but she puts a link in a list no one will read. So that makes it okay, right?
But again, that doesn't feel good. Clickbait is something else that doesn't feel good online, but it's everywhere. Veritasium did a video about clickbait saying,
now, there seems to be a paradox when it comes to clickbait. People almost universally claim to hate it, but you also see it everywhere. So why is this? Well, one of the problems is we don't all agree on the definition of clickbait. When I Google it, the top definition is, on the internet, content whose main purpose is to attract attention and encourage visitors to click on a link to a particular web page. We could call this type 1 clickbait, and there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with it. I mean, if you didn't try to attract attention and get people to click on your links, then you wouldn't really be doing your job. But there is a second definition, one that I think more people ascribe to, which is something such as a headline designed to make readers want to click on a hyperlink, especially when the link leads to content of dubious value or interest. Wikipedia says a defining characteristic of clickbait is that it is sensationalized or misleading. And it also talks about teasers that intentionally withhold information to exploit the curiosity gap. They give you enough information to make you curious, but not enough to satisfy that curiosity.
Just going to emphasize that, satisfy curiosity. YouTube has said it looks for viewer satisfaction for the algorithm, but only the person can really know whether they were satisfied or not. Watching the video all the way through may not leave a satisfactory feeling. It could end leaving far too many open questions, or it could end answering questions you think are more nuanced and need to be explored further. So I would argue there's a lot of interpretation still needed for type 1 clickbait, but Derek goes on to say,
what's important to recognize is that for any given video, there is no one true title and thumbnail. Each video could have hundreds or thousands of different legit bait titles. For example, how does a zero-G plane work? I went on a plane that does parabolic trajectories. What happens to fire on a zero-G plane? Now, the most enticing titles and thumbnails are found close to type 2 clickbait.
Whether you think the clickbait was good or bad is therefore up to each individual. When reading about fake news or misinformation, one paper said, we analyze fake news as genre blending, combining elements of traditional news with features that are exogenous to normative professional journalism, misinformation, sensationalism, clickbait, and bias, suggesting clickbait is part of fake news and therefore related to misinformation. Changing thumbnails on YouTube is common practice.
So if you see a YouTuber changing titles and thumbnails, this is why. Because that effort can be rewarded many times over. I've seen people objecting to this practice because they think the creator is trying to dupe their audience, get them to click on the same video more than once, but that's not it. The whole point is to get YouTube to show the title and thumbnail to more people. We're trying to increase the number of impressions.
You could argue it is deceptive, misleading, or misinformation as you lean towards that type 2 clickbait. But if the content satisfies the viewer, it might not feel bad. But if it doesn't satisfy, then it might feel bad. Here, Derek discusses titling choices.
And while there are certainly financial incentives to getting more views, that's not why I do it. As an educational YouTuber, I think there are two very good reasons for using excellent type 1 clickbait over more straightforward packaging. To understand the first reason, let's consider two different possible titles for my most recent video. I called it The Simplest Math Problem No One Can Solve. But it's a video about the Collatz conjecture, so perhaps a more straightforward title would have been simply to call it that. The problem is, if I publish a video called The Collatz Conjecture, the most likely people to click on it are those who already know what the Collatz conjecture is. And the vast majority of people will never have heard of it. So for them, the title is meaningless, and only the very curious or those who really like Veritasium would click. In contrast, calling it The Simplest Math Problem No One Can Solve conveys more information about the video to everyone.
Here is an example from my own analytics talking about academic publishing. I kept the thumbnail the same, but added Veritasium at the start of the title. In case you're not sure, the big increase in views is when I changed the title. Derek from Veritasium, his argument is what I built the video from, and there are clips in there referencing Derek's arguments and points. Some people weren't satisfied with the video and said that it was clickbait, putting his name in the title. Other people were satisfied and didn't comment, so I don't know either way. I can say it was good clickbait, other people would say it's bad clickbait, but Derek goes on to say,
now, is it ironic that a channel whose whole purpose is to promote a truth-seeking mindset has to experiment at the edge of what is truthful in order to fulfill that purpose? It is something that I often worry about.
Which, when looking at the academic discussions about clickbait and misinformation, clickbait was added as a concept because it is closely related to sensationalism and used frequently as a lure on social media where many fake news stories are disseminated. Another comment confirming what Derek was alluding to. Clickbait headlines typically invoke what have been called forward referencing strategies to create curiosity gaps in the minds of readers. I want to emphasize that minds of readers, or in this case viewers, leaving the interpretation or feel up to each individual. Then when looking at news, old fake news has also been closely associated with propaganda, with political motivations driving the use of false information. And fake news is generally referred to stories including false or misleading information created with an intention to deceive for political or economic gain. The paper mills and content mills are what I start thinking about, but created with an intention to deceive. Does that mean if the intention wasn't to deceive, it's not misinformation? One person wrote, Misinformation is information presented as truthful initially, but that turns out to be false later on. And disinformation is outright false information that is disseminated for propagandistic purposes, but may be identifiable as false later on. Other people discussing this said, an intention to mislead on the part of the originator of messages is not necessarily required. But if false news is created with an intention to deceive, and misinformation can be shared without an intention to mislead, false news can't be misinformation. Or these people disagree somewhere. Shock. Disagreement. An examination of 34 academic articles that used the term fake news between 2003 and 2017 resulted in a typology of types of fake news. News satire, news parody, fabrication, manipulation, advertising, and propaganda. In addition, at the same time, news is socially constructed, and journalists often exercise subjective judgment on which bits of information to include and which to exclude. So does that mean all news is a type of misinformation? News is vulnerable not only to journalists' own preferences, but also to external forces such as the government, audiences, and advertisers. Note, one of those sources was from 1950, so this conversation has been going on for a while. Fake news is not a new term, but all of this suggests fake news, disinformation is somewhat up to the consumer, and is influenced heavily by the way the information is presented. As Flanagan and Metzger demonstrated, visitors who are unfamiliar with a website's brand uses the sophistication of the website as a mental heuristic to judge its credibility. A mental heuristic is like a shortcut for quick decision making. Using shortcut rule of thumb decision making obviously has its limitations, especially when those presenting information are, for a lack of a better term, trying to manipulate your heuristics to get better views, watch time, read time, whatever measured metric. Fake news sites regularly rely on an ecosystem of real-time propaganda composed of a network of bogus bot-powered sites that automatically push the same set of fake news stories, highlighting sharing issues online. This is compounded by sharing habits among users who often share posts without verifying their authenticity. Does that then mean I need to verify every post online? Dustin from Smarter Everyday said,
there are no editors to verify the truth. In fact, many people intentionally skip this step so they can post quicker in order to be the first one to get the views. Unfortunately, what this means is now you must verify the truth, because unless it's coming from a reputable source, it is not going to be fact-checked.
Which sounds like the responsibility has been put on us to verify each post, bringing me to this question. Does fake news remain fake if it is not perceived as real by the audience? My initial response would be, yes, fake is fake. That is talking about verifiable facts, events, quotes, numbers, those sorts of things. When discussing predictions, interpretations, or anything that really brings in a philosophy, now I'm not so sure. I don't think we can verify our interpretations by searching online. Bing AI gave me this response. In summary, the perception of fake news isn't solely determined by its inherent falseness. It's influenced by how individuals engage with information. So even if fake news isn't perceived as real by some, its impact can still be significant. Critical media literacy remains essential in navigating this complex landscape. Now, bearing in mind AI is arguably all plagiarism and likely has information in there, it's interesting that it says fake news is not based solely on its falseness. On to talk about the dangers of self-authority. When someone claims they've done their own research, it implies that they actively sought out information, critically evaluated it, and arrived at their conclusions. This self-authority can make the ideas seem more credible, using sources to make your information sound more credible. Audience then using mental heuristics and assumptions, but the only way to get around them is by doing the research in the first place, which you could argue kind of goes against the point of watching the video in the first place, unless watching the video is part of your research into the topic. But then when looking at search engines and misinformation, while media literacy advocates encourage fact-checking through online searches, the reality is more complex. Conventional wisdom suggests that searching online would reduce belief in misinformation. However, empirical evidence shows that searching to evaluate false news articles can actually boost the perception of their veracity. Bing found a blog which referenced an academic article, which is where that statement actually comes from. Author of the original paper saying, "We present consistent evidence that online search to evaluate the truthfulness of false news articles actually increases the probability of believing them." Going on to add, "We also find consistent evidence that searching online to evaluate news increases belief in true news from low-quality sources, but inconsistent evidence that it increases belief in true news from mainstream sources." So these people that looked at using online searches to evaluate whether news was true or not found, when we try and verify ourselves, we often verify the false or misleading information. They said, "We find that the search effect is concentrated among individuals for whom search engines return lower quality information because of the amount of low quality information online, arguably due to the content mills and paper mills, people confirming false or misleading information." Now, Hank Green said,
"All this research shows that humans aren't very logical. Even when we're given information that should adjust our beliefs, like learning that something is a straight-up lie, it's hard for us to let go of how we initially feel about a person or a situation. A possible factor in this is confirmation bias. We tend to be more convinced by ideas that support our beliefs, while opposing information doesn't seem so trustworthy. This is partially because of what psychologists call motivated reasoning. Basically, we're motivated to reach conclusions that we want to reach."
Like also saying,
on top of that, we tend to believe that our views are correct and other people are wrong, especially if their views disagree with ours. This is called naive realism, and it makes it hard for us to separate facts and opinions.
And this is where our findings highlight the need for media literacy programs to ground their recommendations in empirically tested strategies and for search engines to invest in solutions to the challenges identified. Being added, you could also find yourself in what it called information dark. Instead of leading people toward accurate information, doing their own research sometimes takes them deeper into the information dark. The act of searching doesn't always lead to reliable sources or debunking, it can reinforce existing beliefs. Confirmation bias. Bing actually goes a little further on search, talking about metaphorical passive experience. Unlike social media, where misinformation spreads actively, online search is metaphorically a passive experience. People expect to find answers, but the quality of those answers depends on their search items and sources. All that to say, lateral reading and credible high-quality sources are important for media literacy. In my video about faulty journalism on YouTube, I used Johnny Harris as an example case. He said in the past,
"Okay, my number 3 is that the news tricks you into feeling informed. For a long time, I read the news every single day. I would go on and read multiple different outlets, and I would feel that day like, check, okay, I believe that I'm an informed, smart person, and I've just sort of confirmed that belief."
This comment relates to American news, but as all news is arguably vulnerable, and you could also make the argument that communication is all different types of misinformation, if the person watching the news uses their media literacy competency and their level of reading proficiency, then they shouldn't really be tricked. But as the PISA report shows, testing 15-year-olds' reading proficiency, there are lots of people below the baseline. For adults, those numbers could and likely will be different. At the end of my past video, I said, I enjoy YouTube education, which is why I want it to do well. And Johnny makes great videos, but the stylized representation and or presentation can cloud the journalistic integrity that he claims to have. The quality of sourcing, corrections, retractions are the main steps I would focus on for feedback, but ongoing conversations about topics doesn't seem to be best placed on YouTube. hbomberguy, on what I believe was an interview after the plagiarism video, said that
there's no system for punishing it. Not that there necessarily should or could be. In fact, but there is, even worse, there's a reward for it. If you start drama in an interesting way, people will consume that content. So in effect, YouTube is like probably one of the most evil platforms in the world because it specifically rewards being terrible and starting fights in a way that is extremely disconcerting for the future of the human race. And I'm not saying that as a joke.
which if we extend to news, journalism, and misinformation, it's similar. There is no system check, emphasizing the importance of creator integrity and audience media literacy. But sensationalized, potentially misleading content does well. Sensationalism is a characteristic of news content where emotional or dramatic elements of a story are emphasized in an attempt to arouse audience members or attract attention. On YouTube, that could be editing, cuts, graphics, effects, motion graphics, anything to change the way the video is presented. Johnny Harris said,
you know, your camera doesn't matter, it's just about story. And I almost sound like I'm saying that right now, but I'm actually not. I believe big time in presentation and style, that like those two things are equally as important to me as story. However, where I put my effort into presentation and style is the stroke on the borders of the map, the music that I have custom composed.
Which makes sense. It adds to the video. It makes it interesting. Better impressions, better views, better watch time, and at the end of the day, more money. But at what cost? One person wrote sensationalism is identified by stories that intentionally evoked emotion in the beginning of the article, used extreme circumstances to grab attention, simplified and trivialized a complex topic, promoted shock value, or presented in a tabloid-like way. I'm going to emphasize here that obviously this is all up for interpretation and there is no set answer for this. Also, this piece was actually written about writing, not about video. However, adding style and presentation does add the risk of sensationalizing the content, potentially making it misleading, tricking the audience into feeling informed. The critiques I showed in the past video from other creators critiquing Johnny Harris's videos suggested he was simplifying and trivializing complex topics, potentially leading it to be misleading or misinformation. I then argued for creator integrity. If you have integrity, you are honest and firm in your moral principles. This includes accuracy, fairness, objectivity, balance, and transparency, which is important with the internet as it has allowed for the proliferation of false or misleading news stories. When Dr. Mike spoke about the I know all health professionals online, he said,
"Now this may surprise you, but you and I are both partially, if not more so, to blame for this epidemic. When someone says to us they don't know, we're quick to judge, we're quick to dismiss. And in even a less cognizant way, we support them with our clicks. We click on the catchy headlines. We click and purchase those miracle cure-all products.
So Dustin from Smarter Everyday suggests we should be verifying content, and it sounds like to me Dr. Mike wants us to question and probe even the experts that are sharing information.
Look, I get it. We live in a fast-paced world. We want quick answers and even faster results. But before you go on this desperate search for answers and shortcuts, let's talk about what a true expert is. A true expert not only looks at the current, most up-to-date scientific evidence, but also looks at history as a guide.
Now, of course, we all have different levels of expertise in different topics, talking about breadth and depth of understanding here. But Johnny said,
I think the idea of trusting your viewer to go fact-check everything you say is irresponsible and naive. I spend every day of my life making sure that the things I tell you are factually accurate. If I get something wrong, it's a cardinal sin. In a world of algorithms and misinformation and Russian bots, it becomes nearly impossible to fact check everything you see, which is why we rely on trusted voices to help us navigate the information out there.
Now, adding in some context here, I don't think Johnny Harris is doing the fact-checking all by himself. I think he has a team to help him out with that. And I also don't think there is anything with getting something wrong as long as you do the appropriate thing afterwards, either adding in corrections or conflicts of interest notifications, or if need be, a retraction and then re-upload of the video, which to his credit, Johnny Harris does do sometimes. But assuming other people won't look at sources seems somewhat pessimistic or negative to me. I lean more idealistic in my thinking, but you can see how Johnny's views relates to hbomberguy's views from earlier in the video. And as Dr. Mike said,
what this means is that expert opinion is and should be considered the lowest form of evidence.
So when information in content is presented in a way that seems credible and the creator could be potentially manipulating audience heuristics, adding sources, editing, potentially simplifying the story, those that interpret the creator as having expertise may believe the opinions without appropriate challenge. Then again, if the platform does show opposing opinions, then we go back to that previous quote. Psychological mechanisms allow individuals to disregard messages from individuals whom they deem different. So the audience may not read the sources, but they will likely get the opportunity to watch an opposing opinion. Dr. Mike also said,
know that the best form of research is a meta-analysis. It's a combination of studies, not just one, which allows for the decreased likelihood of chance and bias within the results. Know that newer studies are not necessarily better than older studies. Know that studies that focus on disease markers are not nearly as good as studies that focus on outcomes and developments of disease. And no matter what media tells you is a breakthrough, there is no single study that will influence the field of medicine enough to change the standard of care.
I recognize that was health specific, but I think it's good guidance for looking at online content. Does it use a meta-analysis where possible and/or add multiple credible sources of high quality? As John Green said in their course about navigating digital information,
the sheer existence of evidence is not enough to verify a claim. The absence of evidence, on the other hand, is reason to be skeptical of its veracity until you can verify it.
And he said later,
now, I know that this feels like an absurd amount of work to check the veracity of one tweet out of gajillions of tweets. But there is no simple, magical way to have an information feed that is always reliable. And so when you encounter information that comes from sources you don't already trust, you have to be suspicious of it. And even when it comes from sources you do already trust, you have to be a little suspicious of it.
So when looking at content, saying check the sources doesn't seem like the best advice. John, and many others, just using this as an example, are a little more specific.
The fact checkers, on the other hand, did much better because they consistently asked themselves 3 questions while evaluating the sites. 1, who is behind this information? 2, what is the evidence for their claims? And 3, what do other sources say about the organization and its claims?
But of course, there are some people, after doing all of that work, still don't change their minds.
In theory, this should be a no-brainer. If someone has a false belief and you present them with accurate information, they should change that false belief, right? Right?
There's good evidence, including from my own research, that people do respond in the direction of facts in many circumstances, but they update less than we'd often like. And in the macro sense, we don't see public opinion converging around a set of accurate beliefs.
But searching online could confirm misinformation. And even seeing facts that go against your belief might not be enough.
It might be psychologically threatening to us to admit that we're wrong. It's costly just to say, I was wrong. That's hard for me, that's hard for anybody. We'd all like to think we're dispassionate, but as human beings, we're all skeptical of information that seems to contradict some existing value or belief or attitude that we have.
Someone's belief about something is very challenging to change, especially beliefs that are somewhat ingrained in the way that people see themselves. Removing the emotion out of some of the content is one way to tackle the way of removing attachment to information. Wikipedia used 3 content policies to try and reduce the heuristic manipulation.
Wikipedians also adhere to a set of rules when editing and writing content. Their core content policies are summed up by 3 key phrases. 1, a neutral point of view, meaning content must be represented fairly, proportionately, and without bias. 2, no original research, meaning all material must come from a published, reliable source. And 3, verifiability, meaning people reading and editing articles must be able to check that the information comes from a reliable source.
On Wikipedia, anyone can edit the pages so they can try and keep to the content policies. Yes, admins are involved as well, but on social media, and YouTube specifically, it's just the creator, the content creator, that can do any edits.
Anyway, thanks to these policies and warnings, Wikipedia can be a really useful place for getting a bird's eye view of a topic or starting more thorough research. But, and you knew there was a but coming, that's not permission to use Wikipedia as a one-stop shop for conducting in-depth research, nor is it permission to cite it in your work. Honestly, citing an encyclopedia of any kind just isn't a great look for research projects. And Wikipedia isn't perfect. It's not always accurate. As we've said before in this series, when navigating digital information, there is no magic bullet. There's no one perfect or objective source. Partly because everything was made by fallible humans, and partly because the people using sources are also fallible.
Which strengthens my thinking in that all information is misinformation, just on a sliding scale.
The willingness of the human brain to assume that images are real is consistently manipulated by filmmakers, but also by other people. Consider, for instance, this manipulated picture of mass shooting survivor and activist Emma Gonzalez. It's doctored to make her look like she was tearing up the US Constitution instead of the real picture she took with a gun range target. But images don't have to be altered to fool us. Like, sometimes bad actors use real, untouched photos but falsify their context, and that can have really serious consequences. For instance, this image of an election in Mexico in 2017 circulated online as a meme claiming undocumented immigrants were voting in the non-existent town of Battsville, Arizona.
There is an argument to be made that misinformation should be managed by the platforms, but as Smarter Everyday said in their mini-series,
imagine being the engineer tasked with writing software to get through a language you don't speak into a different character set you've never used and try to detect deception in the heart of a social situation you don't completely understand. I bring all this up to explain this is a very real thing that happened, but it happened because there were very complicated engineering problems.
Emphasizing language as an added barrier here, but also showing how complex this situation is from the technical side at least. Later in this mini-series, sharing an experience with bots.
So to try this out and to show you what's going on Facebook, we bought engagement on our own video. So we took one of our videos and I went to one of these companies that sell comments and views on Facebook videos. So when we looked at the bots that are engaging with our post, these same bots from this same company is manipulating politicians from Malawi, a politician in Brazil, a fitness coach, a hair clinic, some rap artist, one immigration company, and a company promoting the future of shapewear. So that's very interesting. So we're seeing political manipulation and we're seeing commercial manipulation at the same time by the same company.
So do these comments look authentic?
So in this specific case, I wrote the comments. So you go to this website, you just write your own comments in a long list, and then they get uploaded by bots.
Which shows how people are trying to find ways to trick the detection system time and time again. I'm trying to avoid free speech in this video, but I think this clip about tech companies and managing misinformation is useful context here.
Oftentimes, different companies, and we at Facebook do this, will draw a line and say there's a certain type of content that we're not going to allow on the platform. Right?
Pornography, for example.
Pornography, hate speech, graphic violence.
Right.
But what we see in the data, and this is not true only on social media, it's also true offline, is that as content gets closer and closer to that line, it can actually get more engagement, right? So if you think about cable news, right? It can be more engaging when things get closer and closer to provocative, sensational. But we actually have the ability to try to change the shape of that curve so that as content gets closer to that line, it gets less engagement, not more.
Which means that
Facebook has actual empirical data that says our hearts are naturally attracted to the extreme. It's no wonder that polarizing content works against us so effectively.
Facebook and other tech companies like YouTube adding more context to content. Facebook using the I for information and YouTube using the context tab thing below videos. But Seth Godin said in a blog a while ago something that I think tech companies and creators could use. When you're trying to make an argument in a scientific journal or a history monograph, you'll need footnotes. Show your work. Make it clear who came before and what you're basing your thesis on. But it seems as though when we're nervous and afraid, we don't need any footnotes. No is all we have to offer. Show your work. It's a good way to demonstrate that your decision isn't based on fear alone. Emphasizing the importance of showing your work as a creator, whether you're making the content or critiquing content. Tech companies could also make this easier if they made sharing links off of platforms easier. But of course that goes against their business model of trying to keep people on their platforms for as long as possible so they can earn money, so it comes back to cost. Money potentially being more important than intellectual transparency. The BBC did a piece about AI misinformation, and one of the children said,
"The right amount of pressure, the Great Pyramid could generate a tremendous amount of electricity."
I find it really interesting that pyramids can
make electricity.
Pyramid power plants were and are possible.
I was quite surprised to find out just a pile of rocks can form electricity.
Then saying,
that video was actually all fake.
I'm actually really confused. I thought that was 100% real.
I would have probably believed it if you hadn't told us it was fake. I mean, I think I did believe it until a few minutes ago. I'm just shocked.
emphasizing how easily children can be persuaded. But of course, that could and probably does extend to adults as well. One girl saying,
The person who was talking sounded like very professional and knew what he was talking about.
which sums up the issue with presentation. It can and is used to manipulate human heuristics and bias towards credibility. A Stanford education group did a study and found that our digital natives may be able to flit between Facebook and Twitter while simultaneously uploading a selfie to Instagram and texting a friend, but when it comes to evaluating information that flows through social media channels, they are easily duped. Some have described this situation as an era of fake news and a time of informational moral panic. This moral panic potentially caused by all the misinformation. One person spoke about information hazards. Information hazards are risks that arise from the dissemination or the potential dissemination of true information that may cause harm or enable some agent to cause harm.
Dr. Bostrom defines info hazards thusly: the dissemination or potential dissemination of true information that can cause harm or enable an agent to cause harm. You're already actively on the lookout for some kinds of info hazards, even though they feel somewhat esoteric. For example, if I was to start talking about Game of Thrones and then say, you know, Game of Thrones is that show that, you would probably want a spoiler warning first, because spoilers are true information that causes some psychological harm to you, and they are therefore info hazards.
So not misinformation, but does relate to our attention towards the information shared online. Information we want or don't want to see. Sounds similar, the presentation of information being used to persuade action. Misinformation doesn't have an agreed upon definition, and I don't think there really can be. But if we include information hazards as part of this conversation, well, now we're looking at all of the information shared online. In my previous video, I said, journalistic integrity for mainstream media is important. Qualifications, standards, and expectations try to hold those reporters and presenters accountable. Some people interpreted this as me saying that mainstream media is trustworthy and has good journalistic integrity. On reflection, I can understand that interpretation, but that wasn't my intention. My intention was to point out that mainstream media does it better than YouTube journalists at the moment, but there are still plenty of mistakes. In December 2006, RTBF, the French language public service broadcaster in Belgium, interrupted regular television programming with a breaking news report about the splitting up of Belgium as a federal state. Not entirely accurate, and its critics described it as an irresponsible action for a public service broadcaster. In 2010, a similar high-profile hoax was broadcast in Georgia. The pro-government Imedi TV station broadcast a fabricated report about a Russian invasion of Georgia. Tensions between Russia and Georgia at the time rendered the story plausible in the eyes of many viewers, and considerable panic ensued. To be clear, both those news stories were inaccurate, but aired on mainstream news. There are plenty of other examples, so we all have room for improvement. And this is where I want to start talking about bullshit. Here, we focus on pseudo-profound bullshit, which consists of seemingly impressive assertions that are presented as true and meaningful, but are actually vacuous, having or showing a lack of thought or intelligence. I think this article puts it quite well. People are likely encountering more bullshit in their everyday lives than ever before. Now, bullshitting is something that we likely all engage in to some degree. One person saying, fake news is Frankfurtian bullshit, essentially suggesting they're not focused on the truth, but some other purpose. Often, in this case, leading back to money, but it could also be about image, thinking back to the I know all doctors Dr. Mike was talking about, making it sound like you know or understand when actually your expertise is limited. Now, I am going to preface this next bit by saying, being from England and guns having literally no part in my life, this conversation goes well beyond my level of expertise. And to be clear, I do enjoy and respect all of the work Johnny and his team put into his videos. But this is an example brought to my attention from the Johnny Harris video from a commenter inside the comments section, and I think is a good case study.
However, after watching this video, which is admittedly done really well, this documentary is honestly just a thinly veiled passive-aggressive hit piece against the Second Amendment in America. So now I have to debunk it.
Johnny and his team making a video about guns, and another person having a different opinion.
I was struck by how peaceful and celebratory and wholesome this all was. So much different than the way guns are presented in the USA. So how did we get here?
So you traveled all the way to Switzerland to do what I do every year in Teasdale, Utah and New Mexico, surrounded by beautiful mountains, and it's incredibly peaceful. Except when I or other people do this exact thing in America, we get criticized for it. Where here you're romanticizing it because it's Switzerland.
This to me sounds like the creator team for Johnny is being somewhat selective with the information that they're sharing.
The idea of a well-regulated militia spread across the ocean to a group of British intellectuals who were secretly conspiring to overthrow their own king.
In 1776, they declared independence, using their own well-regulated militia to fight off a tyrannical king and his standing army.
You see, the way he's explaining it gives you the impression that the king was a foreign government. He wasn't. He was their government. So our founding fathers used their personal guns to overthrow their own government that they saw as tyrannical, which is why they wrote the Second Amendment. He glosses over this fact throughout the entire video because this fact contradicts his entire argument in this video.
Bringing back the bullshit quote, seemingly impressive assertions that are presented as true and meaningful but are actually vacuous. So I'm now asking myself, is there a lack of thought or intelligence in the way Johnny is presenting this information?
This whole legal framework was very clearly like, yes, you can have guns, but only if you are ready to use them to defend our country from invasion or insurrection.
Now, this is where Johnny reaches deep inside his bullshit bag. No, it's not like you can only have guns if you are ready to use them to protect the government. He's speaking as if the central government gives us the privilege to own guns. The people already had guns. Remember, they just used them to fight the Revolutionary War. The Second Amendment, which was ratified in 1791, simply directed the central government not to infringe on the people's right to keep and bear arms. What he's quoting is the Militia Act of 1793, which says, hey, we know we can't take those guns from you, but we can still call on you to help us out in these 3 specific cases. He's being very deceptive by trying to fuse the Militia Act into the Second Amendment. That's not how that works.
Lacking thought or intelligence sounds really harsh and quite piercing, but I think Johnny's expertise or Johnny's team's expertise is certainly being challenged here, suggesting an alternative purpose over purely sharing the truth, whatever truth means to you.
It did away with a lot of the original laws requiring people to join the militia. And now, without a duty to form a militia to protect the country from invasion and insurrection like the Constitution said, they were left with just the second half of this amendment, the right to bear arms, and how it should not be infringed. Guns started to become more of a personal tool, a tool to pursue their American dream, to hunt, to protect their family, to exterminate.
Wow. He really tried to erase part of the Second Amendment to make it fit his narrative. The first clause of the Second Amendment isn't about requiring people to be in the militia. It's expressing the necessity of the people to always be able to keep and bear arms, so that if they needed to come together and form a militia for the 13th freaking time to possibly fight a tyrannical government, including their own, they would be well regulated, i.e. functioning, because they would have arms. The first clause of the Second Amendment depends on the second clause. The fact that the U.S. has a standing army doesn't make the first clause less relevant. It makes it more relevant.
An argument where the story is simplifying the information, potentially to the point of misinformation. If this topic interests you, go explore, links are in description. My point here is even if a team does the research, you've got fact checkers in there, you've got sources in there with the source doc and loads of time being put into presentation, of editing and thinking how you're going to present information, someone can still call bullshit. For a different video example, this video started with,
why aren't we taught about money in school? In this video, we figure out why most of us graduate high school with an incomplete education on money and learn what they were supposed to teach us in school ourselves.
And that got me hooked. I mean, that's the entire point of the start of the video, but it got me hooked and I wanted to watch. Now skipping to the end of the video.
I tried to make this video as the place to start when it comes to learning about money. I know that's the thing that I found the hardest when trying to figure this all out. I think the 3 rules that Pete lays out are a really good starting point. Spending less than you earn, insuring against things that you can't control, whether that's with actual insurance or with an emergency fund, and saving for the future. I think that's just a fantastic summary of everything you need to know when it comes to money. That's why he's a professional and I'm just a guy on YouTube.
Which, not gonna lie, triggered me. They said we were taught in school, but we are just still confused. And then spends most of the video giving advice. So the video doesn't discuss much about lessons, curriculum, education, teaching, or anything school education related, really. I could just call it bullshit, but it does have expertise in the video, highlighting a packaging mismatch. I could call it clickbait, misinformation, bullshit, but that's not entirely accurate. It is still good content. Just because it went against what I expected doesn't mean it was bad or wrong, just not what I expected. Thinking back to that, does the content satisfy the curiosity gap? Dr. Mike, talking about health content again, said,
we know that there are lots of different opinions out there about how to tackle medical misinformation. What are people getting right and getting wrong when it comes to doing exactly that?
Well, it's easy to vilify anything that goes against current standard of care. And there needs to be a fine line drawn there, because currently we may have certain treatments and protocols for cancer, but those may change. But we need to be able to be open-minded and at the same time not misguide people from actual proven remedies that work.
Which to me sounds like using content in the context of everything else. And then he highlights one of the main struggles with creating and sharing content online.
This is incredibly nuanced conversation because you want to be able to leave room for debate and new ideas and provocative thinking. But at the same time, you don't want to allow misinformation space to flourish and go viral.
hbomberguy talks about AI technology, saying,
as technology progresses, the methods of plagiarism are getting stranger and more complex. The hot new tool in the stealing tools box is generative AI, like ChatGPT, Stable Diffusion, or Midjourney, which can produce new art or words on command using a process known as stealing. Sorry, that's an oversimplification. The process is called, complicated stealing.
Which, when I think back to the feel-good plagiarism, this isn't.
None of the people whose stuff was stolen to create this were asked permission or compensated. I certainly wasn't, but you bet they're charging you a monthly subscription for the privilege of using Theft Machine 4.0. When you look into what a large language model actually does, it boils down to a slightly more advanced version of mashing the predictive text button on your phone, which makes it especially dangerous when it comes to writing reliable information. AI frequently hallucinates imaginary people, books, and historical events, because it doesn't actually know any facts, just what facts look like. It's like asking James who came up with Disney Gay Days. You can't trust it. They had to put "Don't trust me" at the bottom so they don't get in trouble for inventing a machine that makes up lies. But because it has copied a lot of text and can guess a lot of new ways of saying it, the power this tool brings specifically to thieves is tremendous.
Thieves, yes, but also those looking to learn. If AI plagiarizes, it often copies somewhat accurate information. If AI doesn't plagiarize and it's just making it up, I would argue that is probably worse when it comes to sharing information online. Yes, this makes plagiarism much easier, but I would argue it's the paraphrasing examples of plagiarism that becomes much easier, which is what most people are already doing. They're paraphrasing other people without putting any sources or credits anywhere. When talking about paraphrasing plagiarism in practice, hbomberguy says,
not to downplay the chance for these to be successful, or the possibility of a more sophisticated version in the future, but it's heartening to recognize that these aren't even really AI. A person had to make these videos. It's still just people doing the stealing here.
And AI is stealing certain sample data, so it still has the human biases in it.
Humans often profile people by actively being racist. At least an AI will just use bad science to profile you, but it can't be racist. I iBorder Control's algorithm was initially trained on white European men, which will make the algorithm, if it's going to be accurate at all, more accurate with that group than with others, creating more false positives in minorities. And there are multiple past examples of AI being racist, such as deeming people with a second nationality to be signalled for investigation, or black faces being deemed as having more angry expressions than white ones. Projects like iBorder Control have led to the AI Act, which hopes to limit or outright ban various uses of AI in the EU.
And even AI bots created for games that have specific rules are somewhat flawed, like the example with the Go bot.
Look closely. You can see that the adversary is trying to systematically surround the white player, a basic strategy, but in what the researchers describe as a, quote, double sandwich method, a surround of a surround, and so on. When the adversary does this, any good human player would easily see their groups of stones about to be taken and play accordingly, and yet the superhuman AI doesn't seem to care and makes a massive blunder. Chance of winning, 0%. The double sandwich technique was so successful, in fact, that it wasn't just winning, it was making it seem like the superhuman AI didn't actually understand what a group of stones was, a fundamental part of the game. Note here that the Go adversary bot wasn't playing better Go than the superhuman AI, it was simply taking advantage of a fundamental lack of understanding.
AI follows sets of rules, but society doesn't really have rules, and if they do, they change every couple of minutes, so you'd never be able to keep up with them. On social media, an abundance of information sources online leads to individuals to rely heavily on heuristics and social cues in order to determine the credibility of information and to shape their beliefs, which are in turn extremely difficult to correct or change. Hank Green, talking about YouTube, said,
"But you know what happens when you do a lot of chemo is you also watch a lot of YouTube videos. So I've done that, and I found out there's a lot of amazing, good stuff on YouTube. But I was not always happy about the sciencey rabbit holes I ended up going down. There are a lot of videos on YouTube that are just not doing the work. Like, they plagiarize, they don't fact check, they exaggerate, sometimes they straight up misinform, they never retract stuff when they get things wrong, and they do all of it under the banner of science communication. I see this to some extent as a call for the people who are doing it well to do it better, to compete with those people."
Which I fully agree with, but as he says,
we've been doing this for 12 years, and it is getting a little bit harder to compete on this platform with folks who are not, I would say, putting in the work of good, accurate science communication.
So those doing better might take longer to make those videos. And when it comes to many of those topics, including those from academia, you get situations like this.
Is that the initial dramatic discovery often gets all the press, and to be honest, there wasn't much press here. You can search for Paracarium marginensis, you won't find a great deal, but at least it, got reported. Nick Laner's, who I was quoting, and he had talked about it on a few occasions. And the follow-up was in a much smaller journal, one I'd never heard of before, and just didn't even show up in the search results.
And when on YouTube you do want to challenge someone,
I think it's much more a case of, unless somebody came with so much overwhelming evidence, when you're hearing things one at a time, when you're hearing this incident of plagiarism, when you're hearing this thing that's not accurate, and you're hearing them in isolation until somebody compiles this stuff, which is what hbomberguy and Todd in the Shadows did, it can be easy to brush off or to compartmentalize or to think, okay, well, that's just a thing that happened that time.
And as I said earlier, I think mistakes are okay, and arguably in some cases should be encouraged to help with the learning process. But it's when people are not learning from their mistakes and making mistakes in bulk that there could be a potential issue in the future. And that's for me at least.
Because when you start, you've got to first learn the fundamentals, which is where popular advice like Still Like an Artist comes from. And there's a quote in here which captures it beautifully. "Nobody is born with a style or a voice. We don't come out of the womb knowing who we are. In the beginning, we learn by pretending to be our heroes. We learn by copying." But it's important to remember that that's only the start.
This is where the sharing learning experiences in public and trying to regulate professional work both online at the same time becomes very difficult. If you make a mistake online for everyone to see, well, everyone can see it. Is that a good learning environment? I think it depends. Good faith rebuttals like this.
So if YouTube has somehow directed you to my channel, I can almost guarantee that you watch CGP Grey, and specifically you have seen his iconic video, Hexagons Are the Best Guns. Now, I watched this video when it came out, I liked it, but one thing stuck with me. One of the arguments that Grey makes is that hexagons are the strongest shape, and that's why they are the best shape, which is surprising because it's pretty common knowledge that triangles are actually the strongest shape. But somehow this is not the first time I've seen this misconception, so I figured I'd make a video about it.
Or similar feedback videos is how I think we could develop, but
conflict and disagreement are not a bad thing per se. Tension over how we should live can create new and wonderful things. Our values, norms, and taboos are always evolving, and whatever we think is normal today will not be normal in the future. But we also need social glue to hold our societies together, because our brains don't care about the meta level of humanity, but about being safe in a tribe. Until about 20 years ago, we did something truly new that hit our brains like a freight train. The social media internet, the digital town square.
Social media making lots of things easier, talking, agreeing, disagreeing, and labeling.
Whether you want it to or not, your brain sorts people by worldviews and opinions into teams. This is not simply tribalism, it goes further. Researchers have called this process social sorting. On the digital town square, you encounter people that express opinions or share information that clash with your worldview. But unlike your neighbour, they don't root for your local sports club. You're missing the local social glue your brain needs to align with them.
But sorting is not necessarily bad or good, it's what you do with the sorting. And disagreements and arguments is what some people go looking for.
And I don't always agree with Larry, but I always grapple with Larry because he's so interesting and he's so thoughtful that even when we don't agree, I'm like, actually, I want to hear him out, right? Because I'm going to learn from it. And that doesn't mean I always come around to agreeing with him, but I'm going to understand a perspective better. And that's really a great feeling.
Yeah, there's this interesting thing on social media where people kind of accuse others of saying, well, you don't want to hear opinions that you disagree with or ideas you disagree with. I think this is something that's thrown at me all the time. The reality is there's literally almost nothing I enjoy more.
But as Lex does go on to discuss, it's about the quality of the disagreements, arguments, and debates.
There is like a very harsh drop off, because what I like is high quality disagreement that really makes me think.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, there's a threshold. It's a kind of a gray area when the quality of the disagreement, it just sounds like mocking and you're not really interested in a deep understanding of the topic, or you yourself don't seem to carry deep understanding of the topic.
Now, even if those discussions do happen, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are seen. Years ago, I heard some claims about sleep that were written in a book from Matthew Walker in a video. I was skeptical about the claims, so I did some lateral reading and found a blog post. The blog by Alexei Guzzi challenges much of what Matthew Walker actually wrote about in the book from an integrity standpoint, as well as the research points he makes. But 2 years after this blog post was published that heavily criticized and critiqued some of the points and the research methods and the presentation of the information used in the book, Andrew Huberman hosted Matthew Walker on his podcast that got loads of eyeballs and, well, ears. But the conversation didn't bring up any of the critiques or the criticisms that come from the blog, so this is where I start thinking about what Johnny Harris said.
When Joe has these people on, it almost feels like he's giving them a chance to tell their side of the story. Like they don't have a place to tell their side and they've been unfairly censored. But I think this is flawed thinking. Not everyone who has a point of view and who is famous has ideas worth hearing or debating in our society. I really believe that.
And I think that has some merit. But this again moves towards the freedom of speech, which I want to try and avoid for this video. But I do think this emphasizes the importance of reading proficiency and scientific integrity as competencies when consuming information online. Having written a book with titles with a history in academia doesn't necessarily mean that your academic practices are good, and there's plenty of academic misconduct that happens around as well. But when you do end up making response videos in the YouTube case, they are normally way longer, as this example shows.
How did he come to the conclusion that Canada legalized all drugs? And how did that conclusion survive what he calls an investigation? I was nowhere near prepared for the rabbit hole this video sent me down. I went on a real journey. Observe the runtime of this video and compare that to the 14-minute video I am responding to.
My initial thinking is, well, the first video is going to get more views, more attraction, more eyes, because obviously we're biased towards what comes first. But then when we think about the attraction to drama and conflict, maybe the reaction video or the critique video will get more views. And this is where I think the YouTube discussions could mimic the academic discussions, just instead of it being academic paper after paper with loads of words most people won't understand unless they're in the conversation, you can discuss through YouTube videos. I have seen this on YouTube back and forth with personal arguments normally, but I haven't seen many with conceptual arguments or discussions that go backwards and forwards, probably because of the lack of views those videos would get. Again, bringing back that question of money versus intellectual transparency. In some, but by no means all, online journalism, the approach has been to publish now, correct later. The idea being that the wisdom of crowds or crowdsourced fact-checking can easily correct errors in this medium. The medium spoke about in this quote was blogging, but does the wisdom of the crowds hold up on YouTube? Feel free to discuss that one in the comment section. But as Veritasium said,
now that we know how best to make educational videos, and any experience can be simulated in the video setting, YouTube must be the platform that will revolutionize education.
And I would argue those posting videos on YouTube, no matter what the topic or genre, are educators. Veritasium says,
luckily, the fundamental role of a teacher is not to deliver information. It is to guide the social process of learning. The job of a teacher is to inspire, to challenge, to excite their students to want to learn. Yes, they also do explain and demonstrate and show things, but fundamentally, that is beside the point. The most important thing a teacher does is make every student feel like they are important.
So when I think about plagiarism and misinformation in content on YouTube, I'm thinking about the consumer. You know, I could say student here, but I don't think that label is that accurate or useful in this case, because we are all learners and educators with varying degrees of expertise in whatever topic it is that we're talking about. So can the information help the consumer? When it comes to plagiarism and harm...
And when interviewed and asked about these accusations of plagiarism, Voss actually came out and said, this is technically plagiarism, but I would describe it as minor to inconsequential. And honestly, I'm inclined to agree with him. Yes, technically speaking, this is plagiarism, but like, you know, who's really getting hurt by this? The only person who would really be harmed by the result of this would be Voss, right? The person who she's copying, and he doesn't really seem to care. He thinks it's inconsequential.
To be clear, I'm not saying plagiarism is good, but if the person being plagiarized doesn't mind, again, I feel it comes back to that feel-good plagiarism, ethics and morals and creator integrity for each individual situation. All YouTube creators as educators might not feel right, but this article reviews the state of research on citizen journalism over the past decade. Going on to say, citizen journalism reflects a broader paradigm shift towards more participation by more untrained people across many areas of society. Consider the citizen scientist movement, or the incorporation of audience content into professional art projects, etc. Other terms like networked journalism, participatory journalism, open source journalism have also been used. But what is a professional journalist? Or more specific to this case, what is a professional educator? Teachers have qualifications that vary in country, in state, and even in school levels in some places. We also use teaching as a verb for loads of people, like parents teaching children, and obviously YouTubers are included in that. Does that mean they are a qualified teacher? No, but they are still educating. In the comment section of a critique video, two educators discuss presentation of information and misinformation. Veritasium saying, I'm disappointed you didn't fix any of the factual errors we alerted you to via email before you launched this video. Tom replying with, I imagine you know the flaws in these responses to what you mistakenly call factual errors, but I'll do you the courtesy of replying to them anyway. And this conversation is filled with moral and ethical differences in the way that you present information online. I mentioned earlier, hbomberguy made me make an assumption. Those sorts of assumptions I think we can limit in videos, but there are other assumptions with morals, ethics, and integrity of creator presenting information that we can't really constrain or add rules and guidelines to. Post-published conversation being the best place at the moment to really clear up anything that's misunderstood or potential presentation misinformation, which Tom and Veritasium do inside the comment section. But YouTube YouTube comments are a bit of a mess, and I think this could be helped with some additional sorting options. Looking at the comments of Nick's video, there is a pinned comment, then the option to sort by newest, first, or top comment. The top comments view shows what viewers are likely to value and interact with based on various signals, such as the comment text, handle text, channel name text, avatar, and video. Sounds like AI being involved somewhere in all of that, and I'm not an avid user of Reddit, but their ranking or sorting by hot, new, top with the date options seems far better to me. However, there are some uses of comments that I am not talking about.
But what happens is this type of stuff is that his last video was uploaded on September 2021, so over 2 years ago. But if I go on the comments right now, because Bomber Harris's video brought all of his stuff up again, 5 years later, might I add, you get comments like this. This guy needs to delete his YouTube channel. Your mother that must be very proud. Hey man, just say you should probably take the hint and call it a day on your life. Never heard of you before. Props to HBomb for making you famous. HBomber, smiley face. Who else is here from HBomb?
Feedback, constructive criticism, alternative interpretations, yes, but as this creator says,
when someone makes a video like Bomber Harris, when someone makes a video like whoever, think about how you act in that moment and try and think about these terrible people as actual people, not characters. Because life is long, people change, people can atone, which we should believe in, and dragging this on for potentially half a decade plus, who does that help? Like what good is that for society?
Now, I don't think those comments will stop, but trying to discourage them is what I'm trying to think about, which the Reddit sorting option may help with. But YouTube has become a platform for professional educators, many in the science communication space. And maybe regulating content could take some guidelines from the regulations of education systems. When I hear things like this,
the idea that YouTube and Google making money off the back of adverts being served against pseudoscience, AI-generated news, that's really, that seems really unethical to me.
I tend to agree. It is an argument where YouTube might not want to prevent or constrain misinformation online because then they may get less views and therefore less money. But YouTube also said,
YouTube told us that they recommend YouTube Kids for under 13s, which has a higher bar for videos shown. They said they're committed to removing misinformation from their platforms. They also directed us to information panels that show additional context on conspiracy-related content. We found this was only present for a few of the videos across the 50 channels. They didn't comment on advertising revenue they may receive from these videos.
Now, firstly, that is YouTube Kids, not all YouTube. Second, the context panels, which I mentioned earlier from my experience, show up when you don't expect them and don't show up when you do expect them. Here is an example.
Now, why is a warning or a banner about climate change showing up on a video about this? It's because of the description. Over here, holy crap, I hate Django documentation, but I'm warming to it. Essentially.
As hbomberguy says,
internet video isn't a silly playground where teens pretend to be scared of horror games anymore. It's a business. There is real money to be made in this space, or so the emails from the World of Tanks guys keep telling me. So it's definitely worth interrogating the fact people's work is being exploited in these money-making endeavors.
And as Tom adds,
Plagiarism town, and if you're not careful, you're gonna find yourself on a YouTube thumbnail.
Oh no, you...
The last thing I want to say in this video is I've definitely noticed a theme over the years of companies and corporations feeling extremely comfortable plagiarizing off independent online creators. And I think this happens for two reasons. One, these companies know it's near enough impossible to prove plagiarism, and without a publisher and their big scary legal team behind us, there's very little we can do, and they know they can get away with it. But also too, I think there's just a broader belief that anything on the internet is free real estate. Who made this? I don't know. I'm not going to check. It's mine now.
Which Council of Geeks rounds up nicely.
There's terms of service, technically, gets violated frequently, and people don't get punished, and people get punished for violating it when they, in fact, did not. But, like, honesty, transparency, there's no enforcement mechanism for that stuff here.
Going back to hbomberguy,
why are we holding YouTubers to standards? That would be like expecting accurate history from someone whose name has historian in it. Because YouTubers often project a sense of being scrappy, do-it-yourself amateurs, it feels almost wrong to expect them to be professional. But a lot of them are professionals, regardless how authentic their persona might be. YouTubers are now among the most recognizable faces on the planet and have become immensely wealthy doing this. Some are so influential, we literally call them influencers. Maybe it's a good idea to have some standards for not stealing. Maybe.
Now, YouTube have made moves in the health professional content creator space.
YouTube has recently made some changes to our medical misinformation policies to hopefully make these complicated guidelines simpler for creators, viewers, and partners. We streamlined dozens of existing medical misinfo policies on COVID-19, vaccines, and more to fall under 3 categories: prevention, treatment, and denial. And we began to remove content that contains misinformation about cancer treatment.
Which Dr. Mike expands on by saying,
so YouTube has taken that stance one step further and have actually labeled who is an authoritative source, who has a medical degree. And because of that, the audiences can know who to trust, where they're getting accurate information from. It also adds a layer of credibility for not just myself, but also the tons of other great medical creators out there that are debunking this information, that are putting forth good information.
That then potentially limits the expertise tab to those with the piece of paper and the certificate. But I still think it's a step forwards, yes, with its limitations. Hank Green, talking about money for creators, said, "It's about time we gave users the ability to decide what kind of content they want to reward." And I would argue the like-dislike button did this pretty well. But here are some other ideas.
Now all this is pretty intense, so how do we resist the influence of false news if it's everywhere and spreads so easily? Well, one idea is to tag headlines with warnings if third-party fact-checkers have found them to be dubious. In the 2016 Yale study, this significantly reduced the chances that a headline was perceived as accurate, even if participants saw it a couple times. Another tactic is to look more carefully at news sources. It's easy to lean into confirmation bias when you're arguing with your Aunt Sue on Facebook and looking up sources to back up what you already think. But you can dig deeper into news outlets and authors to understand things like what biases they might have or how they did their research, and think about sources more critically. And finally, when you see a surprising headline, take a second to reflect on it before you click on the share, retweet, show all your friends buttons. Shocking stories might seem important to amplify, but they are not necessarily true.
And like this creator says,
considering this problem from the viewer's perspective, I think it's almost mandatory that people keep some healthy skepticism and criticism in mind while consuming edutainment. It's still the Wild West here on YouTube, heavily reliant on an honor system that creators are being upfront with you. But as illustrated by hbom's plagiarism video, that isn't always the case. And it's a lot easier to let your guard down if you trust that the video person knows what they're talking about.
For creators,
we've talked a lot today about what plagiarism is, but we should also talk a little bit about what it isn't. It's completely fine to be inspired by someone or build on ideas you got from somewhere else, especially if you're open about it.
Mirrored by Tom.
Inspiration is a trigger. It's the starting pistol that gets you running. And while the inspiring instant and the finished product may end up having nothing in common, it's still where the journey began.
And as Hank puts nicely when discussing AI,
the question of the modern day is not whether we can figure something out once we choose to scrutinize it. The question is when and why do we choose to scrutinize things? Which, if we vibe with it, in whatever way, we generally choose to not do. And that's not just an AI image generation problem, that's an everything problem.
Then, when looking at some of those people that are working on this problem, they've said, large-scale correction of specific misinformation cannot succeed without the support of the media or widespread dissemination of the corrective information. Another adding, even if truth itself proves elusive, the process is a goal in itself and it must be safeguarded. A book about all of this said that they refrain from using the term fake news for 2 reasons. First, it is woefully inadequate to describe the complex phenomena of information pollution. The term has also begun to be appropriated with politicians around the world to describe news organizations whose coverage they find disagreeable. It's becoming a mechanism by which the powerful can clamp down upon, restrict, undermine, and circumvent the free press. So they refer to this issue as an information disorder. This figure is one way of looking at the information disorder. Misinformation is when false information is shared, but no harm is meant. Disinformation is when false information is knowingly shared to cause harm. Malinformation is when genuine information is shared to cause harm, often by moving information designed to stay private into the public spheres. Looking back at the figure, misinformation with false connection encompasses sensationalism, bias, clickbait, and the manipulation tactics online creators use. As this figure shows, there are lots of elements to this information disorder. The agent who creates a fabricated message might be different to the agent who produces that message, who might also be different from the agent who distributes the message. Looking at this figure, there are lots of different questions we could explore. But most of us are not going to do that unless, as Hank said, red flags are raised. The International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions suggested in 2017 to stop fake news by considering the source, check the author, check the date, check your biases, read beyond or laterally read, look for supporting sources, ask if it is a joke, and ask the experts, bearing in mind what we said about experts and expert opinions.
What this means is that expert opinion is and should be considered the lowest form of evidence.
When looking at governments, this act from Singapore caught my attention. And for context, for those unfamiliar, Singapore is the country right at the top of the PISA report, so their education system must be doing something pretty well for the PISA metrics measured, of course. The purpose of this act is to prevent the communication of false statements of fact in Singapore and to enable measures to be taken to counteract the effects of such communication, to suppress the financing, promotion, and other support of online locations that repeatedly communicate false statements of fact in Singapore, to enable measures to be taken to detect, control, and safeguard against coordinated inauthentic behavior and other misuses of online accounts and bots, and to enable measures to be taken to enhance disclosure of information concerning paid content directed towards a political end. This act includes lots of potential guidelines that could be used by online tech companies and platforms to help address this information disorder. Book talking about this information disorder, also giving lots of different suggestions for all the different agents involved. But at the end of the day, there is no one answer. There is an ongoing conversation with varying experiences. For plagiarism, hbomberguy says,
"Why did this stupid shit happen? Oh, it's money! This is a really good racket. I'm almost jealous. With a small team of editors, you could knock one of these out every few days. And she does. I mean, she doesn't need a writer. Now, maybe this technically isn't plagiarism. Maybe you give them a pass because having a link somewhere in a description makes it okay to have done this. But I think we can all agree that even if it isn't plagiarism, it is, at the very least, shit.
And when looking at content online, we will all get a different vibe that comes from the way we interact with information. For misinformation, it's the same. What vibe do you get with the content? But because there are no rigid definitions, there's no real way to regulate anything online. But if you have any thoughts or ideas, let me know in the comment section below and we can have a conversation. Harry, YouTube, or any developers, this is my idea to help tackle plagiarism and misinformation on YouTube at least. We already have video transcripts. I copy and paste those video transcripts into a document and then put them into a free plagiarism checker. Most are limited to 1,000 words, which obviously isn't ideal, but it's the best I have found so far. The checker looks for plagiarism, obviously, but it is also useful for surfacing other related content, so even if it is a less than 1% match, it can still be useful sometimes. I think Turnitin is the best at checking for plagiarism because it's trusted and used by universities. Maybe YouTube could work with Turnitin as an institution, or they just make their own. YouTube already has the transcripts from other YouTube videos, and I would imagine the data from Google is available in some way. And when we look at the overall percentage value, we can see if it is someone else's work or if it's lots of different sources that have been brought together to create something that's new. That value could also be used to determine how much added value there was to content reuse. If it is a phrase frequently used on the internet, then you can show a list. Maybe show the earliest one first and then a list of the rest. That list not only helping for transparency, but also for lateral reading so people can open up multiple tabs and have a look to see what other people are are saying. And if this was done by YouTube, it takes us off of the creators that take time doing it, and those that don't do it also get somewhat caught. And this could be added as a similarity check, not necessarily strikes like copyright, just a value that people can see, which would help for transparency. I do have a lot of other thoughts on this, but there is my quick pitch. And if you got to this part of the video or skipped because of the timestamps, I do want to say thank you. And if you do want to support what we do or contribute to the conversation through peer review or further conversations, there are links in the description below.